Chekiaio, chekiaio, ahe truaiam hielo, hey. Ipokagata, I tun. In the land of iron, all that I have been iron, all that I will be iron, all that I am. In the land of iron, all that I have been iron, all that I will be iron, all that I am. I did want to talk about the circle of connection that is this Wednesday, because these circles are just as important to you and the community as is attending here at our Sunday gatherings. This is because what is taking place is spiritual practice. Last Wednesday was our first compassionate communication class with Scott and Lisa, and it's integral. It's an integral part of the circle of connection, in which we share the spiritual practice and teach a quality of connection with others that allows compassionate giving to take place. The primary purpose of the circle of connection and these compassionate communication classes is to connect with other people in a way that enables giving to take place. Compassionate giving. So if you think the circle is a place where you can come and vent your feelings and tell other people how they can serve you better, you picked the wrong circle. I'd like to quote from one of the books that we're using, besides the Compassionate Communication book, which is also similar to the Speak Peace in a World of Conflict by Marshall Rosenberg. He says, "We are giving service to ourselves and others, not out of fear of punishment or hope for a reward, not out of guilt or shame, but for what we consider to be part of our nature. It is in our nature to enjoy giving to one another." So real quick, close your eyes and think of something that you've done within the last 24 hours that in some way has contributed to making life more wonderful for someone else. I can tell who did it by the smiles on your face. Because if you have contributed to making someone else's life more wonderful, you will be smiling. Because it is making you happy. It's in our nature to give. It's universal. Most people enjoy giving to others. Nothing is more enjoyable than our efforts in the service of life. Thank you.
The word for today is change. I rely on the guidance of Spirit to lead me through necessary changes. I have learned through experience that change is an essential element of my spiritual journey. I have also learned that I have within me all the guidance I need to make the choices that will most effectively move me forward. Change is simply the consequence of choice. I do not need to resist it, nor do I need to seek it out forcefully. I relax and trust the guidance of spirits within to show me the changes that are mine to make, and to lead me away from the changes that are not needed on my path. If former negative ways of thinking reappear, I turn within to step forward boldly in faith.
Bless us, dark earth, as we give back that which we have received, as we make a forest of blessings into a ridge of blessing for the future to grow upon. Hail, Mother, who art the earth, hallowed be thy soil, rocks and flora.
Close your eyes and feel yourself connected to the love of Mother Earth as we chant the sound of Om together. And we're going to allow that sound to resonate many times until it just kind of kind of fades away on its own. So if you feel like chanting the sound of Om 5 or 6 times, let that bring you that centering, that connection to Mother Earth. Okay? So take some nice deep breaths first. As you inhale in, fill your lungs with that fresh air. And as you exhale out, you're releasing, you're letting go, and you're just being.
Be the reason someone smiles today. Be the reason someone feels love. And believe in the goodness in all. We're all equal because we are different. We are one humanity. We are one humanity. One God, many faces. One family, many races. One truth, many traces. One humanity. One heart, many graces. One light, many places. One world, many spaces. One humanity. We are one humanity. We are one humanity. We are one humanity. We are one. Shower people with love, show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna turn out fine if we only will. If it only will on. Shower people with love, show them the way that you feel. Things are gonna be much better if you only will. I could stand here today, the week of Valentine's Day, and not speak about love. Just wouldn't be right. Love is the Alpha, the Omega, the yin and yang, the Tao. The greatest message of all. And yet Valentine's Day really only represents romantic love. When we attempt to examine love, we only find more mystery. Love is too large and too deep to truly be understood or measured. No one has ever come up with a satisfactory definition of love. However, author Dr. Scott Peck, who you know I frequently quote from his book Road Less Traveled, defines love this way. Imagine you just got a Valentine's Day card in the mail. You open it up, and it says this: the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth is love. Kind of a groove buster, isn't it? It's only adding to the confusion of love, of what love is. He tells a story of a young man who says his mother loved him so much that she drove him to school and picked him up every day for years and years, even though it was very hard on her. But smothering is not mothering. By overprotecting him, she was only serving her own emotional needs rather than her son's spiritual growth. One of the main distinguishing features between love and what only seems to be love is the conscious or unconscious intention of the mind of the would-be lover. Notice that As defined by Dr. Peck, love is a circular process. Loving changes the one who loves. It's an evolutionary process. When we successfully extend our limits, we grow into a larger state of being. Therefore, the act of loving is an act of self-evolution, even when the purpose of the act is someone else's growth. It is through reaching towards evolution that we evolve. This includes self-love. We are incapable of loving another unless we love ourselves. And you've heard me say before, how can we ever hope to love another person until we can love ourselves completely, unconditionally? Just as we cannot be the source of strength unless we nurture our own strength, so then self-love and love of others is ultimately the same thing. And ultimately, the love of Source, the love of the Creator. Love does imply effort because the act of extending our limits takes effort. When we love someone, our love becomes real only when we apply exertion for ourselves or others. Like when we take an extra step or walk an extra mile. Now, many who desire to be loving are not, in fact, loving. The desire to love is not love. Love is an act of will, both with intention and action. Will implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. If we are not loving, it's because we have chosen not to love. On the other hand, when we extend ourselves in the cause of spiritual growth, it is because we have chosen to do so. The choice to love has been made. As I mentioned before, misconceptions about love abound and cause us suffering as we attempt to make sense of our experience. Let's explore the nature of love by examining what love is not. Love is not falling in love. This is the most powerful and pervasive misconception of love on our beautiful planet. When a person falls in love, they certainly feel a powerful way that they love the other person, but problems immediately arise with the belief that love is a sex-linked erotic experience, and that's not true. But before we go any further, let's examine the evolution of a newborn baby. You can learn a lot from a newborn baby, because when a baby is born and it's lying there in the crib, when it moves its arms and its legs, the entire world moves with it. When it is hungry, the world is hungry. It cannot distinguish between itself, the crib, or the world around it. It and the world are one. There are no boundaries, no separation, no identity. Now in time, the child begins to experience itself as a separate identity. When it's hungry, Mama does not always show up to feed it. When it's playful, Mama is not always in the mood to play. Then the child experiences its will as something separate from its mother's behavior. A sense of me begins to develop. By the end of the first year, they know that this is my arm, this is my leg, this is my foot, this is my head, this is my point of view, this is my thought, this is my feelings. The baby knows its physical limits, its boundaries. Knowledge of these limits is what has become known as ego boundaries. And these continue to develop into adulthood, but become more mental than physical. And it becomes lonely behind these boundaries. Some people, because of their traumatic childhoods, see the world as unnurturing and dangerous, and feel their boundaries are protective. They find safety in loneliness. But most of us feel our loneliness is painful and yearn to be unified with the world. Falling in love, it allows us to escape this loneliness, well, temporarily. The experience of falling in love is a sudden collapse or a falling away of ego boundaries, permitting one to merge with another person. It's a sudden release of oneself. It's a pouring out of ourself into the beloved and a dramatic ceasing of loneliness accompanying the collapse of ego boundaries. It feels ecstatic. We and our beloved are one. Loneliness no more. However, this is actually an act of regression, echoing of the time when we merged with our mothers and our sense of omnipotence. We feel that the strength of our love will conquer all obstacles and overcome all problems. Yet this is the same unreality of the 2-year-old who feels itself to be king or queen of the world. Just as with the unreality of the 2-year-old, so goes the unreality of the couple who have fallen in love. Sooner or later, the individual's will reasserts itself. He wants to have sex. She doesn't. He wants to put money in the bank. He doesn't like his friends. He doesn't like her friends. Both realize that they're not one. Ego boundaries snap back into place, and they fall out of love. They begin to dissolve their relationship, or they begin to initiate real love. So the perception that we are loving when we fall in love is an illusion. Real love doesn't have roots in a feeling of love. Well, how can that be? Real love doesn't have its roots in a feeling of love. Real love often occurs when the feeling of love is lacking. When we act lovingly, even though we don't feel loving. On the other hand, falling in love is not real love for these reasons. Falling in love is not an act of will, not a conscious choice, no matter how eager we are. We are more likely to fall in love with someone who is not a match for us than we are to fall in love with someone who is more suitable for us. In fact, in studying shadow work, I've discovered that we are more attracted to a person with a similar shadow as ours than we are to someone with greater love than us. We can choose how to respond to falling in love, but we cannot choose the experience itself. Falling in love is not an extension of our boundaries. It is a partial and a temporary collapse of them. Extending our boundaries takes effort. Falling in love is effortless. Once the boundaries have snapped back, the individual's spiritual growth is no larger for the experience. But when the limits are stretched, they tend to stay stretched. Real love is a permanently self-enlarging experience. Falling in love is not. Falling in love has little to do with purposely nurturing ourselves or others towards greater development. If we have any purpose in mind at all, it is to terminate our loneliness. Certainly we're not speaking of spiritual growth here. When we fall in love, we feel like the heights have been attained. They've been reached and there's no need to go any higher. We feel no need for development. We are content to be where we are, and we see our beloved as needing no spiritual growth or development either. We perceive him or her as perfect. If falling in love is not love, then what is it? I don't know. Perhaps it is which increases the probability of sexual pairing in order to enhance survival of the species. A lot of agreement there. Maybe it's just a chromosome joke to trap us into marriage with the illusion that it's going to last forever. This illusion is fostered by the myth of romantic love, perpetuated every year by Valentine's Day, wherein the prince and princess live happily ever after, forever. This myth tells us that for every young man, there is a young woman who was meant for him, and vice versa. That we will live happily ever after in perfect harmony. But if we fall out of love, then nothing can be done but to live unhappily ever after. Or get divorced. This is, of course, a lie and fosters confusion and suffering. Millions of people around the world spend vast amounts of money and energy to make this myth conform to their reality of life. Truly, an acceptance of yours and your partner's individuality is the only foundation for real love and a mature marriage. Now, real love also has to do with ego boundaries, since it involves an extension of our own limits. When we extend our limits through love, we reach out toward the beloved whose growth we wish to nurture as well. Before we do this, we must be attracted toward them, invested in, and committed to the other person beyond ourselves. In this process of wishing to nurture their growth, we also nurture our own growth and expand our consciousness. So what transpires in loving is a gradual enlargement of ourself, our personal consciousness. It's an incorporation of the world within with the world outside, and a stretching and thinning of the ego boundaries. The more we extend ourselves, the more we love, the more blurred becomes the distinction between ourself and the world. We become identified with the world and experience the same ecstasy we have when our ego boundaries partially collapse when falling in love. Only instead of being merged temporarily and unrealistically with a single beloved object, we merge realistically and more permanently in a mystical union with much of the world. The feeling of ecstasy is a bit shaded with this union, but while it's less dramatic than the bliss of falling in love, it's much more lasting and ultimately satisfying. The heights of ecstasy are not glimpsed and lost again, but are attained forever. Since I'm speaking to a room full of mystics here today, I just want to describe the prolonged oneness with the universe that is associated with real love using the word mystical union. Mysticism is essentially a belief that reality is oneness. Mystics believe that our common perception of the universe as containing multitudes of separate objects is an illusion. Mystics hold that true reality can be known only by experiencing its oneness through giving up ego boundaries. It's impossible to see oneness in the universe if you see yourself as an object separate from the rest of the universe. Hindus and Buddhas frequently say that the infant without the ego boundaries knows more about reality than its adult parents. Some suggest that to know true reality, we must become like a child, like an infant. This can be a tempting and dangerous doctrine for adolescents who are afraid to assume adult responsibilities. They may say things like, I can give up trying to become an adult and become a saint instead. The psychiatrist, Dr. Peck, jokingly says, schizophrenia rather than sainthood is achieved in this manner. Remember, we must possess and achieve something before we can give it up. The infant without ego boundaries may be in closer touch with ultimate reality than its parents, but it is incapable of surviving without them, and incapable of communicating its wisdom. The path to sainthood must go through adulthood. There are no shortcuts. Ego boundaries must be hardened before they can be softened. An identity must be established before we can transcend it. We must find ourselves before we can lose it. falling in love, sexuality, and the use of psychoactive drugs may give us a glimpse of nirvana, but not nirvana itself. Lasting enlightenment, true spiritual growth can be achieved only through the persistent exercise of real love. And yet falling in love makes us make real commitments from which real love may begin. It gives us a taste and therefore an incentive for the more lasting mystical ecstasy that is the fruit of a lifetime of loving. In closing, I'd like to say that while falling in love is not in itself love, it is part of the greater and mysterious scheme of love. In peace and love for self, the community, and planet Earth, I'm Reverend Arvel. Thank you.